Thank you. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? I hope so, indeed. Well, thank you all very much for coming and for forsaking talking to the butterfly, the power of the fourth estate, that Fairs loves everyone, the world of the novel, and the puppet show by Ritz. So we're delighted, and a little bit like Amina Saeed's introduction, we're delighted with however many we have here today, especially for the Kashmir dispute. Well, you know, the Kashmir dispute needs no introduction because it's been with us since the existence and the creation of Pakistan in 1967. And I think we're all delighted to have Mr. A.G. Noorani to talk to us and to launch his book, The Kashmir Dispute. I don't know if any of you have yet had the opportunity to go through it. It's over 500 pages, including an 150-page introduction, several chapters and numbers of documents. There is a great deal in the book, some of it really quite provocative, reevaluating and looking again at the dispute in the light of new documents which have appeared. I think I just want to read the quotation which you quote from Fairs, since we're listening to Fairs over in another room, about Kashmir, which is really very, very interesting and it's very relevant. Mr. Noorani quotes Fairs as saying, "The best solution for Kashmir is that both countries should leave Kashmir alone, and as a self-governing state, Kashmir should establish friendly relations with both countries. Eventually, this is what will happen, but after suffering much harm and damage. People like you on both sides should jointly press such a proposal." In 2002, Mr. Noorani wrote, "The Kashmir question comprises a blend of four incontrovertible elements. The state's secession from the Union is ruled out. The UN resolutions on plebiscite are obsolete. Not so the ones forbidding unilateral solution, still less India's pledges to the people. The LOC is no solution either. Dixon was right. The valley is the heart of the problem. And fourthly, the people are more alienated from the Union now than they were in 1950. Most Indians resist this truth, known to the wide world, lest it spelt secession and resentment, and resent characterization of Kashmir as an international problem crying for a solution. Intellectual honesty and moral courage demand instead that all the four truths should be faced boldly and treated as a challenge to diplomatic creativity and statesmanship. Many of us think that it is rather disgraceful and does no credit to India that this matter should have dragged on so long." That's Vallabhi Patel saying this to Owen Dixon in 1950. Over half a century, has not wiped out that disgrace shared by leaders of India and Pakistan. Pretty forthright statements which are contained in Mr. Noorani's book. Well, I have also with me today three distinguished individuals, and we're going to have a little discussion, question and answer, but also questions, please, from the floor about what you think. Firstly, we have Mr. Noorani. He needs no introduction in terms of his experience and knowledge on Kashmir. Zafar Hilali, retired diplomat, political analyst and commentator. Iqbal Akhund, also a diplomat and advisor on foreign affairs and national security. And Cabeiri deBurgh Robinson, anthropologist and associate professor of international studies and South Asian studies at the University of Washington. Their full biographies are in your very comprehensive booklet, so I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm just going to ask Mr. Noorani to start with whether, in light of what you've written, do you have any optimism in 2014 for a resolution of the Kashmir dispute?
Let me say, yes, indeed, I am optimistic. And let me say what the book is about. The book is a collection of my articles, prefaced by a lengthy introduction, capped with appendices with some unpublished documents. Now, in this introduction, I have raised points which I felt had not been asked before. For example, it is said that Sheikh Abdullah wanted to accede to India. That is not true. Why did he send 2 emissaries to Pakistan? Nobody asks. Why did he send them? And why did the Pakistan's leaders refuse to meet them? He sent the 2 of the tallest aides of his, Bakshi Ghulam Muhammad and G.M. Sadiq. At the time that G.M. Sadiq was in Lahore, the travel raid was there. Now, if the travel raid had succeeded, Sheikh Abdullah would have been kept hostage and he would have come. Now, I've dug up some of the things to show why he sent them. You see, whatever may have been his emotional predilections, and he did belong to the State People's Conference headed by Nehru, soon after his release, he realized that the people didn't want to accede to Pakistan. And Sheikh Abdullah was nothing if not a barometer of his people's emotions. So he decided he should accede to neither. And around the same time, he told Phillips Talbot, who became Assistant Secretary of State later on, accession to either is ruin for our people. So he asked the Maharaja to institute self-rule so that the people would decide. The Maharaja had other ideas. Now, Ali Awar Jang, a veteran diplomat, said if the Maharaja had played his cards cleverly, Kashmir would have emerged as a sovereign state. This could have happened only if the Maharaja had made a pact with Sheikh Abdullah. We'll have a sovereign state, you be chief minister, I'll be the ruler. It would have. But the travel raid queered the pitch. I must mention to you one important document which has been lost sight of by Pakistanis as well as Indians. It was the written proposals presented by Mountbatten to Quaid-e-Azam at Lahore, the government house, on the 1st of November 1947. Remember, by that time Indian troops had landed and there was no way Pakistan could have repelled them. The proposals were, wherever the ruler's religion is different from that of his people, there should be plebiscite. Quaid-e-Azam said, exclude Hyderabad and I'll agree to the rest. I have done another book on the same last year, The Destruction of Hyderabad, in which there's a whole chapter on Hyderabad's Kashmir connection. That was a fateful resolve. Had Quaid-e-Azam accepted it, the details would have been tied up in India. Quaid-e-Azam would have returned to the place of his triumphs, now as head of state. He could have visited the Muslim refugee camps and the history would have been different. However, Nehru, by the time that Indian forces began recording one military victory after another, was warned by his daughter in May 48, a letter from Srinagar, that, look, if you hold up, the plebiscite will go against us, the only man who thinks we'll win a plebiscite is Sheikh Abdullah. Sheikh Abdullah must have said that to please her. Anyway, the long and short of it is, Nehru said one thing in public and another in private. So all this year, he had already decided in 48 not to hold a plebiscite. I have been even-handed. I have recorded Nehru's behavior as well as as Muhammad Ali Jinnah's. What has happened since, I'll jump to it, the 65 war was also equally unfortunate. It silenced the Indian, I won't call it lobby, the Indian group led by Jayaprakash Narayan, of which I was a humble member, which wanted conciliation on the old terms. We were silenced. You cannot get on the conference table what you have lost on your own chosen forum, the battlefield. Second venture also went there. The third venture, the covert operation launched by Zia, has also come to a lot. However, the people of Kashmir, I have said, didn't want to accede to India from the word go. Equities have since cropped up. This is not 47. 65 war. Now no Indian government can accept secession and survive for a day. Now the liberals don't want to accept the second part. They think it will dilute the first part. And the hardliners don't accept the first reality, namely that the people don't want India. At the same time, no Pakistani government can accept the LOC as a border and survive. Why should Pakistan, a revisionist state, want under a settlement what it already has? And the last grim truth is that the Kashmiris will not accept partition or denial of democracy. We have to have a settlement which reckons with all these harsh realities. I've come across all these solutions, including the fatuous report of the so-called Kashmir Study Group. There's Joseph Schwarzberger regards Kashmir as a piece of cake in which you could parcel out this way or that way. You can't have these Andorra solutions and this and that. But foreign analogies are helpful. And in my fuller book, there are those analogies also. Suffice it to say, I want to conclude that the 4-point formula is an interim solution, an ad hoc, which guarantees self-rule, withdrawal of troops on both sides, which renders LOC so irrelevant that de facto Kashmir becomes one. And finally, there's a joint mechanism at the top. The result is that Pakistan and the Pakistan half, I don't like this obscene lingo, Pakistan occupied Kashmir and Indian held Kashmir. I call it West Pakistan, West Kashmir and East Kashmir. These two chief people can meet and resolve. When the Council of Europe was being set up, Field Marshal Statesman, who was a wise man, told Churchill, Winston, let it be an acorn, not an oak. And you have seen Council of Europe grow. Now, if this will be a beginning, it will be a way out, and the potentialities are enormous. There will be a sea change, and it will be an interim solution. It will not be a final solution for some time. As things improve, Kashmir is made. What else do you have? Strife, bitterness and rancor. This way you have a settlement. We can address our domestic matters. And finally, I'll conclude in the words of the genius of Lucknow, Asarul Haq Majaz, in his brilliant poem, Khabe Sahar. कुछ नहीं तो कम से कम ख्वाबे सहर देखा तो है कुछ नहीं तो कम से कम ख्वाबे सहर देखा तो है जिस तरफ देखा ना था अब तक अब उस तरफ देखा तो है Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Noorani. I think we are looking for this elusive at the moment win-win situation, so that all the participants, and we do here include the people and inhabitants of Kashmir, are comfortable. There can't be an imposed solution, and also I think what we have learned is that Kashmir can't be carved up like a piece of real estate. I'm going to turn now to Zafar Hilali. Can you, from a Pakistani diplomat's perspective, especially having been involved during some of the discussions, can you give me some comments in terms of whether you feel that there could be this win-win situation?
I think lose-lose is what comes to mind when we talk
so you're
about
still
India
pessimistic.
And Pakistan. But I thought I'd start off by saying what Victoria didn't mention is that who bequeathed us the Kashmir problem. And while I was thinking of what to say, I came across a little book which says that, which has David Cameron talking of India and Pakistan over Kashmir, saying in 2011, and I quote, "As with so many of the world's problems, we are responsible for the issue in the first place." Well, such self-chastisement is uncommon and refreshing, but alas, little else. Left to grapple with the problem, the British bequeathed India and Pakistan. Of course, we made a complete and bloody mess of it. I say of course because that is what the world has come to expect of these two insufferably quarrelsome neighbors. However, getting back to what Mr. Noorani said, I got the impression, although this book hasn't come out in Pakistan, but from what I could gather from Google, is that a plebiscite in Kashmir is the inherent right of the people of Kashmir. If indeed that's what he said, that's music to the ears of most fair-minded people. And I think, to tell the truth, Pakistan has been shouting that from the mountaintops, although India chooses not to hear. But fortunately, we are not so unreflecting. It's not as if judgment has been passed and the case is closed. Kashmir remains the top issue on our national agenda. Some say a solution to the Kashmir issue is not possible because a settlement acceptable to all three sides, India, Pakistan and the people of Kashmir, does not exist. And nothing will overcome the logjam unless both sides forego their maximalist positions or agree to kick the issue into the tall grass and thereby allow time to work its healing patina over old wounds and differences. And that roughly is what Musharraf unsuccessfully proposed to his Indian hosts a decade ago. I have often wondered why Musharraf did that and have come to the conclusion that he must have thought it easier for us to suffer an injustice than to commit one. Perhaps Ambassador Iqbal Akhund, among the most distinguished of ambassadors this country has produced, will shed some light on Musharraf's ploy and whether it was a good move, because that's the closest we have come to solving the dispute. But let it be known, even if India is strong enough to be unjust, we will never accept the status quo.
Well, I mean, I think lose-lose is slightly pessimistic. What you've raised when you're talking about a plebiscite in the valley is, of course, looking back at the Dixon plan. And I think in the book, one of the aspects I found very interesting was your discussion of Owen Dixon and the work, of course, done by the Australian scholar William Reid in examining exactly what went wrong with the Dixon visit in 1950. And, of course, he then submitted his plan in September 1950. We haven't really advanced very much further in terms of the mechanics of working out whether you'd have a plebiscite only in the valley or indeed a regional plebiscite. And that has now reappeared a lot of times in discussions. But Ambassador Akhund, perhaps you could comment on the Musharraf plan and whether you think it was sort of a slip between really reaching something successful or actually it was never going to take off in the first place.
Do you want me to comment on the Musharraf plan?
Yes, I think, yes, if you could. Thank you.
In the first place...
Can everyone hear Ambassador Akhund?
Is it all right? Is it all right? Can you hear me?
Yes. Right at the back?
Put it near you.
In the first place, in answer to your question to Mr. Noorani, I am an optimist, but a skeptical optimist, because I really don't think a mutually satisfactory solution is on the cards. An imposed one also doesn't seem likely at the moment. But let me take up the 4 points that Mr. Noorani mentioned in his endgame. The first is, let me see, I made a note here of the 4 points. Let me just check them there. That there would be an irrelevant ceasefire line, whatever that is, followed by troop withdrawals on both sides and a renewed autonomy to the Kashmiris, finally a joint mechanism. Now let's look at what are the ground realities. The eighth ground reality is Kashmir does not want to be part of India. This has been true for 65 years, and this is not likely to change in the next 65 years. India is perfectly well aware of that. So, if they want to keep Kashmir, they have to keep it. There's no other way. So all these things making the line irrelevant, what does that mean, making the line irrelevant? It means you're recognizing the line without saying so. Because as Mr. Noorani said, sovereignty of either side ends at the line. Now, if we agree to this solution, it is a ceasefire line solution without saying so. If we agree to that, all right, then we have given recognition to India's occupation as India's sovereignty. And through us, the entire world will then be relieved of the problem, thank God. Each side has what is got on the basis of finders keepers. Now, once they have that, are they going to withdraw troops? Very doubtful. They may thin them out, but the troops are there to control a restive population. And the population will remain restive. Because autonomy, they have tried autonomy before. They got the maximum autonomy under Abdullah. And as Mr. Noorani points out, it was a Bobby booped autonomy. And gradually, and later not so gradually, it was whittled down and shredded. Once they have sovereignty, what's there to stop them from doing it? The problem that cannot be solved legally can be perhaps made a little less difficult by diluting demography. And this is definitely on the cards because Mr. Modi, who is to become the Prime Minister and his party, one of their principles is that all Indians should be free to own property in Kashmir. Now, this ban on property owning by outsiders comes from 100 years ago when the British sold the place to Maharaja. So what's there to prevent them? We will be in no position. Joint mechanism to do what? Control travel across the borders, tourists, and what kind of hotel should be set up where, and so on. Joint mechanism, I see it as a place of total contention and argumentation and dismentation. No, I'm afraid, if you ask me, then what is the solution? I frankly don't know what the solution is. We've tried all sorts of things. It was lost in the first place by our own miscalculation, Qaid-e-Azam's miscalculation. He thought we could keep Kashmir and we'll relieve Hyderabad. And that didn't happen. Then we tried war, which frankly speaking is the only way to settle such problems. Well, we bungled it. Then in 1989 we had a situation in which the Indian High Commissioner called on me and said, today there's a feeling in Delhi that if you drop paratroops in Srinagar, you can take over the place. The Indian administration had lost complete control of the situation. The whole place was being run by committees and this and that. Well, we blundered there also. We thought that if you go in with Allahu Akbar, the whole thing will fall into laps. Now we have this Musharraf, and the general feeling in Pakistan now is that we must have good relations with India. Very right, totally for that. There's also a feeling that it's all up to us, that Pakistan must do this and must do that in order to have good relations. Well, I'm not so sure about that. We have done quite a lot. The other things we should do, like MFN and so forth, that also will happen. But that's not going to solve the Kashmir problem. And if you don't solve the Kashmir problem, it will be there forever rankling. There's no way you can just put it behind you. So, a solution better than joint management would be to leave the whole place completely alone, fly both flags as in Andorra. Andorra is under the nominal sovereignty of the President of France and some bishop in Spain. But that won't be accepted by India. We might perhaps live with it, but India won't accept it. Because look at the history of India-Pakistan negotiations, before that Congress-Muslim League negotiations and so on. Our dialogue is, the undercurrent always is rancor of the past. What you did to whom and when and why and that sort of thing. We have to overcome that, and that's not going to be for many generations to come. I think we have to mind our own business at the moment. Let Kashmir stay, let the Kashmiris take care of it. There's nothing that we can do about it. The worst thing that we can do is to get a quick fix, accept the ceasefire line of 4.5 solutions, and then let it be.
Well, in other words, I think what we're saying is that leaving it in the tall grass is not going to work, and certainly the 67 years have shown that it hasn't gone away as an issue. I'm going to turn now to Cabeiri deBurgh Robinson, because you've worked a lot on human rights and in Kashmir. And of course, what we do have to realize, and certainly my own field research, but both in Azad, Jammu and Kashmir and also in the Valley of Kashmir, has shown me very evidently, is that we are talking about people. We're talking about several million and rising people. We're not talking about a piece of real estate. And so, Cabeiri, can we just focus on the people? It's very difficult to get consensus, and I think this is one of the most difficult problems with the Kashmir issue. We talk about leaving it to the Kashmiris, but to which Kashmiris? How do we get that consensus? And can you just talk a little bit about the human rights aspect? Because the Kashmiri people have certainly suffered tremendously, particularly in the last 30 years of an insurgency.
Has a kind of, people don't have a faith in its moral legitimacy anymore. We have had over 25 years of what Kashmiri peoples call black laws that have actually legalized the very practices that make widespread policies of human rights abuses not only a kind of a ubiquitous practice in the Valley, but a ubiquitous experience of almost all of the young men who have come of age in this current generation, and a denial of their experiences by the very authorities that now claim to want to negotiate with them and to reintegrate them into political processes. So one of the questions I would ask is, what about other kinds of legal practices that are very important in the Indian democracy? Holding accountable perpetrators, actual changes in the institutional structures of the army and the judiciary that actually make it possible for people who have been accused of very, very serious, perpetrating very serious crimes and actually allowing their hierarchical structures to continue to perpetrate them, to be simply redeployed back into the Valley after brief periods of inquiry. No serious evidence has emerged in the view of the people of the Valley of a serious desire on the part of the Indian state to change the very institutional structures that have made these human rights abuses possible. So I think one of the questions is, if you're talking about addressing questions of alienation, is actually thinking about how the Indian state, in any ways, even as an interim measure towards long-term peacemaking and thinking about what these modalities would look like, would actually create a kind of a moral belief again in the power of Indian notions of them as citizens and its obligation to protect citizens that they could actually buy into. The second question about alienation that I would love to hear you address deals actually much more explicitly with the question that Victoria just raised for us, which is this question that and I think there is some truth to this, less than is often played up, but some truth, that at the time of the original UN resolutions, the two major kind of organized political parties that were there to negotiate with and who the UN recognized as local authorities were two major political parties, the All Jammu and Kashmir Muslim Conference and the National Conference, which was based in Srinagar. This is, of course, no longer true. All of the areas of the former princely state have formed, there are at least 4 different areas that have their own constitutional setups, that have their own elected or kind of representational political parties, and many of them are not only alienated potentially from India and Pakistan, but more importantly from each other. There was a deep history of, let's say, alienation from the Srinagar Maharaja's government towards what were then called the frontier provinces and later became the Ladakh Autonomous Hill Provinces and Gilgit-Baltistan. And that suspicion remains, the idea that if they were to be brought back in, they would be subjugated within this new political alliance, much the way they were in the past. So distrust between various peoples of the former princely state of Jammu and Kashmir and questions about how new legal political alliances would actually recognize the autonomy not just of a single representative of this imagined political community, but of all of the sovereign desires of its multiple people, are a part of, I think, the concept of alienation that we have to think about when we think about what peacemaking and settlement of this looks like, not in 47 and not in 59 and not in 65 or 71, but now in 2014, 2015, after all of the experiential histories have actually transformed the political realities of these regions.
Well, I think, Cabeiri, you've raised some very interesting points, and Mr. Noorani, perhaps I think it's appropriate for you now to comment.
Yes. Let me come to the first issue with which I'm deeply concerned. That's the systematic violation of human rights. Unfortunately, those articles are not included in this volume, but I've written extensively based on amnesty reports, based on a report by Vardarajan, the International League of Human Rights, which I think is the best report of the legal aspect. The violation is systematic, and I don't mind letting you into a small piece of confidence. As I was driving from my house to the Bombay airport en route here, I rang up 2 of my Kashmiri friends and said, keep the documents ready. I'm returning via Delhi, and I want to do a next book on the Pachimal massacres by the Indian Army. So I'm very much alive to it, and I realize now, this is not to be diminished. the situation in Azad Kashmir, and this is my main grievance with some of my Pakistani interlocutors, the situation in Azad Kashmir is far, far worse. There was the instance of a brigadier of the army catching the Prime Minister by the scruff of his neck and virtually taking him out. The Azad Kashmir Constitution Act, you remember, Mr. Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, in his course of his campaign in 1974, offered them 3 options. One of them was status quo, the other was assimilation as a province of Pakistan. This constitution rivets Azad Kashmir to Pakistan with a joint council, and I met Amanullah Khan and I didn't need to know it from him. It's there in the constitution. You plebiscite all right for Pakistan, for the East Kashmir. But plebiscite is ruled out in Azad Kashmir. If you ask for plebiscite, you can only ask for accession to Pakistan. Now, is that fair? Is that fair? Secondly, you must remember that in 1970, Sheikh Abdullah had a meeting called the State People's Conference. There were several papers from Pakistan. 6 advocated independence. All the 6 from Azad Kashmir were put in prison in Azad Kashmir. So this is a dichotomy. Lastly, I must point out that when you talk of UN resolutions, the UN resolutions recognize India's sovereignty over Kashmir. You will find it in the first interim report in the letter by Joseph Corbell to Jawaharlal Nehru recording an oral conversation. The plebiscite administrator was to be appointed by the government of Kashmir in Srinagar, and he was to submit his formal report formally to the government of Kashmir. Whereas Azad Kashmir, they were called local authorities. That is and it is called area under the administration of Pakistan. So let's not go back to that. As far as the UN resolutions are concerned, they were abandoned by Prime Minister Feroz Khan Noor at the State Department in a conversation with Henry Cabot Lodge. Ayub Khan in 1960. If the other side has alternative, let it propose it. In 62-63, Bhutto Swaran Singh talks, neither side talked about UN resolution, it was horse trading over land. And Bhutto told the Indian negotiators, you are a defeated country. We were defeated not by Pakistan but by China. Then in 65, after you cannot expect a subsidiary body's resolution to prevail when you have violated the UN Charter, that September 20th, 1965 ceasefire resolution speaks of the political problems underlying the conflict. From 64 onwards, nobody in the Security Council talked about plebiscite or UN resolutions. In 57, Gunnar Yaring, the last mediator, said the resolutions of, last but one mediator, because Graham came in 58, said if you look at the details, the nitty-gritty of plebiscite, you'll find that they are impracticable in this year and age. And in 57, Gunnar Yaring said. But as I said in Pakistan, in National Defence University, I said in India, I said in Kashmir and Pakistan, my sympathies are neither with the Indians nor with the Pakistanis. They are entirely with the people of Kashmir. And I tell them, supposing the UN had not passed resolutions, would you have been deprived of your right to decide your future? Certainly not. Those are the pledges appended to the instrument of accession. Those are the pledges given by Nehru in 1947. Let us see how we can apply them to the realities of today. Unfortunately, discourse in Kashmir has been spoiled by this extremist all or nothing attitude. I'm sorry, I'm a lawyer, I'm a pragmatist, but I do believe that moral dimension is relevant. And I believe that at the moment, it's not a final solution. If you have this roadblock removed, you are moving somewhere, the tensions will subside, and why is this systematic violation in Kashmir and Northeast? Why is the systematic violation elsewhere in the region, not excluding Pakistan? Because the state feels an existential threat. Give peace a chance. Let the people feel, well, Kashmir. There are 3 realities. You can't settle Kashmir by war. You can settle only by negotiations. So the settlement must be acceptable to India, Pakistan and the people of Kashmir. I call it the Red Fort, Mochi Gate Lahore and Lal Chowk Kashmir solution. Now, as Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif said told Indian correspondents in, I think, 97 or so, all of us have to step back. Pakistan itself is no longer talking of UN resolution except as a matter of form. Everybody knows that. And it is not only now Musharraf, whom people love to hate. It has been earlier on, from 60 onwards. Those are the alternatives. And if people want to shed themselves, I'm sorry, I can never divorce myself or ignore the record as I see it. What do we do today? What do we do today to persuade Indians to give up their stand, persuade Pakistan, persuade the people of Kashmir? An interim settlement for 15 or 10 years or 15 years, give peace a chance, let the Kashmiris mix. On one point, Musharraf was dead right. He said the most important part is rendering the LOC irrelevant. Can you imagine the scenario? Sayyid Salahuddin comes from Senegal. He will have the right to return. There will be an amnesty. The entire scene will be different. And this is not the law of Medes and Persians. Musharraf himself in his line of fire says they can do with improvements. I have in my writings suggested an improvement. On all Jammu and Kashmir Consultative Assembly without legislative or executive powers. But the very fact that Kashmiris on both sides meet formally in Srinagar once in 6 months, Muzaffarabad once in 6 months, talk like the Council of Europe. I took it from the Statute of Council of Europe. That itself will be a major move. That is why I quoted Majaz. Look at the future. Give this a chance. If this fails, well, you are not resigning from your position. Your position is there. Time has not provided a solution. I agree. But time has created factors which impede a solution. And the art of statesmanship is to grapple with those realities without abandoning their principles. When you give them Kashmiri self-rule, the new factor is the self-assertion of Kashmiris. Here, this is my answer to my friend Iqbal Akhund Sahib. Once the Kashmiris acquire a voice without being imposed under a new framework, there will be a new scenario. Thank you.
So what we're really trying to do is move away from UN resolutions, plebiscite, but retaining the vital element that the Kashmiris have their right of self-determination, which was inherent.
For God's sake, we moved away from UN resolution 50 years ago.
We may have done, but they still come into the narrative.
What Mr. Bhutto said in the debates on the Simla Pact, he said, what did we get to the UN, from the UN? Only a presidential statement in 64 January.
Zafar Hilali, you want to make a comment on this?
I think it's a bit rich of Mr. Noorani to compare in terms of the sinful acts, to compare India and Pakistan. I tell you, we'll go further than that. We'll say if the Kashmiris want independence, we'll give it to them. Why is he so hesitant? Why do you think Pakistan will not agree to an independent Kashmir? Persuade your government to accept an independent Kashmir and we will accept an independent Kashmir.
What are we talking about? An independent whole Kashmir or an independent valley of Kashmir? We have to get specifics here.
If you want to split hairs all the time, you'll always come up with these problems. Fact of the matter is, there was an entity called Kashmir, the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Let that be an independent state. Why are you saying Pakistanis won't accept it? How do you know?
With due respect to Mr. Zafar Hilali, in 1992 at Tehran, Mr. Nawaz Sharif, who was Prime Minister then, talked about a third option, and there was a big furore in Pakistan. And
it's subsided.
It will subside, but people are not reconciled.
It has subsided.
May I just finish? Zafullah, on one thing, both sides are common, as my friend Ashraf Jahangir Qazi said at the NDU conference. Both Indians and Pakistanis said, we rule out independence. In the McNaughton proposals, there's a document by Sir Zafullah Khan addressed to General McNaughton, the UN mediator.
Noorani Saab, nobody is
allow
saying
me to finish.
Hilali
You are feeling very, I can understand your emotions,
Can
but
we
we
not
are in the
interrupt
realm
each
of
other?
reason. Zafrullah Khan wrote to the rephrase it. The issue is not the future of Kashmir, issue is the accession of Kashmir to India or Pakistan. So Pakistan never wanted independence for Kashmir. If you claim it now, you're very welcome to do it in your personal capacity. But that's not the state policy.
Well, you said that three
Then
times.
secondly, I must point out, Kashmir, there's a Ladakh province, there's a Jammu province. Jammu is also split. You must have a policy which all three side regions will accept. And that is the Hurriyat position. Incidentally, talking of UN resolutions, what is the Hurriyat's constitution? The UN resolutions, or in the alternative, any other solution acceptable to all. So that's the Hurriyat. So why be more royalist than the king?
Well, I think, again, we do want to bear in mind the Kashmiri people. I'm going to see if there's some interest in the audience in putting a question. I think there is. Can we just take it? Because our time is going to be a little bit short. I'm going to take this gentleman here in the blue shirt. And then I shall take this lady. Thank you. But let me just take this gentleman here in the blue shirt. Can we have a mic for
What
him?
about that lady standing there?
Yes. No, well, there are a lot of people. So we're going to try and but we'll get this gentleman here in the blue shirt. Please be very brief. And could you just identify who you are? Because we are now getting into the really nub of the situation. This gentleman here in the blue.
My name is Simon Saeed. I'm a reporter for the Express Tribune. I would like to allude to Ms. Robinson's comments and talk about the fraction, essentially, how fractionalized Kashmir is now. We refer to the people of Kashmir, but we've got Ladakhis, we've got Kashmiri Pandits, we've got Muslims, we've got Gilgit-Baltistan and Azad Kashmir as two separate entities. Pakistan, can we still refer to the people of Kashmir as one people, given the amount of political and ethnic factionalization that has taken place over the past 65 years?
Thank you. Well, it is. I mean, I think we all recognise it's the nature of the state, and we can go back and blame the British not just in 1947 but in 1846 for setting up the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir, which should have been called Jammu, Kashmir, Ladakh, Gilgit-Baltistan. It should have had a very long name. So this is one of the biggest difficulties of consensus. This lady here, yes, can you? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm a writer. My name is Riaz, political-minded writer. What I want to say is that, the stakeholders in Kashmir are no longer just the government of Pakistan and the government of India and the representatives of Kashmir. These are not only the three stakeholders anymore. Because we, the people of Pakistan, are also a party to it now. Because it's because of Kashmir that we have suffered for the past 65 years or so. So, as a representative of the people of Pakistan, as a writer, I was looking forward to listening to something realistic. The fact of the matter is that Pakistan, being a Pakistani, I know that part of Kashmir, which is part of Pakistan, or came to Pakistan, is very much a part of Pakistan and very much assimilated. Nobody can take it away from us. Take it from us, from me. Nobody here would agree. On the other hand, it seems that, India is a sort of jealously guarding whatever has been given by the Britishers to that state. So actually the answer to that, and we have suffered so much. The present plight of Pakistan is because of this unresolved Kashmir problem, really, that we had to have these Talibans who are now declaring half of us non-Muslims. So the thing is that what we could do is actually to begin to pick it up from somewhere and start thinking about what Musharraf had said. The proposal. You see, that was actually agreed upon. And overnight the wordings were changed, right? By Indians, right? So why? Probably some people say because of Advani. Others say it was because of the bureaucracy. Or the Indian army disagreed. But really, I think that to solve this problem, I've been thinking of the whole of Kashmir becoming independent, unacceptable to Pakistan and to Pakistanis. So why not talk about what we share of the proposal from there?
Thank you very much. We're going to take two more questions, and I'm going to ask each of our speakers to make a final comment, because regrettably we are getting out of time, and 1 hour is certainly not enough time to talk on the... Yes, Najmuddin Sheikh. Yes, we had some other questions at the back. Yes, this lady here. Thank you very much. We'll just take two more questions, and then we'll have to wrap up, I'm afraid.
I just want to ask, why is Gilgit and Baltistan being made part of Kashmir? It's not part of Kashmir, it's part of the northern areas. So, I mean, why are we referring to Gilgit and Baltistan as part of the Kashmiri problem? It's not.
Well, I think that's a historical fact, which I will answer just very quickly. It was part of the state of...
No, I think there was some research later on that showed that...
No, I think we'll talk later about that. It was officially, the British handed it back in 1947. They leased it from the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir, and then they handed it back in 1947. Legally, officially, it was part of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Do we have another question? Yeah. Yes, gentleman here, thank you. Wait for the mic. Thank you.
I found the discussion very interesting, but as a present-day Pakistani, I feel that we'll be serving the cause much better if we discuss the 18,000 missing Baloch and the Balochistan issue and the Protection of Pakistan Act that is coming in, rather than worrying about Kashmir and the Tada Act that happened over there and the human rights abuses over there. Nothing is talked about the Baloch missing over here, and people are afraid to talk about it.
Sorry, what issue are we not talking about?
What is happening in Pakistan, the Balochistan issue, the
18,000
missing issue. Yes,
this forum is on
that's
Kashmir.
What I'm trying to point out.
Thank you very much.
Move away from Kashmir
yes,
and
well,
go to this.
Thank you very much.
No, I would like to respond.
Yes,
I think
by all means.
The question raised by Mr. Kamran Noorani is very legitimate. And Kamran Sai is not only your part of the world. Kashmir fouls up the domestic debate in India as well. That is why I feel that if you've got something at your gate, for God's sake, don't kick it out. Take it, grab it, and improve on it. As I said, it's not the laws of Medes and Persians. It can do. But the discourse within Kashmir is sterile. It's all or nothing. I can understand the sense of victimhood, but I can't excuse the students and the academics, the media persons from crafting their own alternative. They don't. They are not proposing any changes, any viable alternatives. Look, for God's sake, you can't kick out Pakistan from Azad Kashmir or India for this. You've got to get them to settle. Now, moral exhortation, legalism will not help. What we need is a practical congruence of interests. And this is what that 4-point plan proposes to do. And people who are impatient with this, I'm afraid, are rejecting the thing because it doesn't come up to their all or nothing approach.
Well, I think it's very difficult. What we're going to have to do is have a little wrap-up. I'm going to give Cabeiri just 2 or 3 minutes to comment on what we've heard from the other speakers and also what we've heard from the floor.
I'll try to keep it shorter than that. I think there's some other colleagues as well. And this is drawing a little bit on your question, but really more importantly to part of your suggestion. Noorani Saab, you have talked about the importance of various peoples and political representatives from all the parts of the former state of Jammu and Kashmir to be able to be involved in dialogue. And with all due respect, I think that dialogue, while it has certainly been impeded across the region, and people have, these political leaders have not had the significant opportunity to explore the implications of the differences, the actual differences in their opinions, that these tropes have to a certain extent become empty tropes. The reason they became empty tropes is because whatever dialogue was allowed was not empowered. And simply allowing people to talk without empowering them with really serious kind of implications towards that their dialogue will have a future outcome on the process as a whole, I don't think actually will change the situation. And I think actually potentially has the possibility of making it worse and more fractious, as in fact, over a half century of keeping Kashmiri leadership out of significant progress, trying to bring them in as a kind of cover for decisions that were already made, as opposed to allowing them to drive forward the process of resolution, has been a mistake. And as I said before, I really think we're past an age where we think about sovereignty purely in state forms, as opposed to coming out of people's movements and their sense of themselves as having rights and stakes in the process of rule. And therefore, I would respectfully ask you to reconsider just that aspect of your suggestions and to consider whether some kind of process of an empowered dialogue might be part of the mechanism that you're actually proposing.
So empowered dialogue. I'm going to leave the last word to Mr. Noorani. So I'm just going to ask now Ambassador Akhund just to make some comments in terms of what we've heard and really focusing on this critical resolution.
Well, I agree that independence is not an acceptable or even a practical proposition. But picking up what Zafar Hilali said, Kashmir Valley is the problem. Is it possible for the government of India to bring itself to restore 370 if nothing else? I mean, I think that could transform the situation, because it would be a practical thing. No questions of sovereignty or ceasefire. Why cannot they do that? Let the Kashmiris of Kashmir run their own problem. And then from there on, we'll see how it goes. I know that we have been remiss in Azad Kashmir. We've locked up Azad Kashmir. But then, we lock up our own people too. So that's something that is the prevailing political ethos here.
Good point. I'm going to leave you the last word.
One last word. I do not see the morality of not letting a people of an entity, a legal entity which existed prior to 47, from deciding whether it wanted to be free, whether it wanted to join India, and whether it wanted to join Pakistan. If what has happened has happened. But if we say that the people of Kashmir must be on board with any solution, and we say this, and we keep repeatedly saying this, then I think we have a moral responsibility to ask them whether or not they want to join us, India, or whether they want to be free. No forcible accession makes sense. We have seen it, it doesn't make sense. We've seen it in other countries, and we have seen it in the troubled history of Pakistan. So let's give them a free vote and accept their decision.
Well, thank you. With three important points just raised that Mr. Noorani, I'm going to ask you to comment on, and I think we must all read his book. We've got empowered dialogue, reverting back to Article 370 in the Valley, and again, this matter of choice from the people of Jammu and Kashmir.
Let me begin with my friend Iqbal Akhund Sahib's point about Article 370. As it happens, Oxford University Press has published a couple of years earlier my book, Article 370, which records the mutilation, virtual destruction of Article 370. So, Iqbal Akhund Sahib, you are absolutely right. But restoration itself is a political action. And that political action must rest, as I've said earlier, any Kashmir settlement must be ratified by the National Assembly of Pakistan, the Lok Sabha of India, and of course the elected representatives of Kashmir on both sides. But the point is, Article 370 restoration can follow inexorably from the 4 points. I've documented this as a constitutional lawyer. Article 370 in its pristine glory fits self-rule like a glove. That's my answer. As far as the ladies' points are concerned, it's painful for me to mention this because I've known the Hurriyat leaders for over 20 years. You know, in 2005, I saw Mir Wais and Yassin walk together. They wouldn't look at each other. If you meet them, every one of them has a bad word for the other. When they have a joint Hurriyat thing, their followers break up. For God's sake, what are we talking about the Kashmiri leaders? Saif Fariki dialogue, kaise karenge? Yassin Malik, they won't contest elections. They won't test their rebels. Let that newly elected assembly come, and in that newly elected assembly, of course, all those who belong to Kashmir, there will be movement, and there will be international observers. Let us have a fresh election.
And on the point which we had here, I mean, if you're saying fresh elections, that's really what you mean by the voice of the people. So
exactly.
Expanding the voice back. We're really back to the quotation I read out from Fairs at the beginning of our session, that eventually the Kashmiris will decide themselves and not be with India or with Pakistan. At this point, I'm going to thank all our panelists, Mr. A.G. Noorani, Zafar Hilali, Iqbal Akhund, and Cabeiri, deBurgh Robinson, very much indeed. And thank you all for coming. And it's wonderful to start off the Kashmir Literature Festival with discussion on Kashmir, which is important, and as we know, not just for the Kashmiris, but for all the inhabitants of India and Pakistan. Thank you very much.
I'm not trying to snatch the last word, but I do want to thank the chairperson and my colleagues on the panel and all the persons in the audience who listen intently and ask very intelligent questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, I'm here for a week.